So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we are going to be seeing 3 Isengard armies try to take Rohan to task in their capital of EDORAS. Rohan, however, have called upon some rather stout support in the shape of the dwarves of Khazad, who of course can certainly make up for some of the strengths that Rohan lack in melee when it comes to their infantry. A pretty interesting pairing, to be sure, and interestingly enough, the snow stands in rather sharp contrast really to the weather in real life where I'm at the moment. So yeah, it's going to be quite interesting, I think. Now, I am a little bit concerned about the shade of the snow once again, but it's kind of one of those things I'm not really certain I can do much about, because if I change my settings I might not be able to get them back again. So regardless, we will carry on. EDORAS, of course, is a very open plan fortress, which is probably why this is actually going to be a siege which is on the shorter end of the spectrum in terms of the length of it overall. I do hope that this means it isn't overly one-sided. We'll have to wait and see on that one. But obviously EDORAS is rather tough to defend, because while yes, you can use the hills to your advantage and there's a lot of nice choke points that you can also use, the fact that it's so open means that enemies can easily use their own skirmishes to shoot in, and the hill actually doesn't really offer you any protection from that either, so definitely for the attackers it's going to be a good idea to try and use as much of their ranged units as they possibly can. And Allfather was the one who sent me this battle replay, so a big thank you to him, and he is one of the 3 Isengard armies on the approach. Some Yokai crossmen, which of course should be really useful for the reasons I just mentioned, because shooting missiles into this settlement is easier than on a lot of other siege maps, and also crossbows in general just deal that extra damage. The armour piercing damage as well should be especially handy when trying to crack through the heavy armour that the dwarves of Khazad are known for. And there's also some Yokai archers as well. Obviously they will not be as damaging, nowhere near as damaging in fact, especially not against the more heavily shielded units that are on the defence, but it still will allow you to cost effectively skirmish with the enemies that are going to be returning fire. Snaga skirmishers as well, another cheap unit which will obviously be able to deliver that armour piercing range damage. It's very low base damage though, and it's also not particularly accurate. The Snaga are also very weak individually, of course. But of course, as I've said before, cheap javelins like this are a very easy way to gain a good amount of cost effectiveness from a single unit, if you decide to bring them in this sort of situation. Then pushing up the ramps, we have some Dunlending clansmen. The Dunlending clansmen, among really cheap militia spears like this, especially when it pertains to the evil factions, are actually pretty decent because they do have that heightened bonus against cavalry. All spears, of course, have got a base bonus against cavalry, but the Dunlenders have also got an intrinsic anti-cavalry bonus themselves, which does stack, so the Dunlending clansmen are good in that regard. But of course, against infantry they're very weak, and they're still vulnerable to charges, so while they do have a bit of extra utility in comparison to other units of this type, they still do carry a lot of the same weaknesses. Pushing up the other 2 rounds, we have some Yokai Raiders, which of course, you know, Isengard do have better line infantry, but the Yokai Raiders are cheap, and you know, they do the job that is asked of them for the price, certainly. And this is the sort of unit that would not be out of place in a lot of the other Orc factions. Isengard, as a general rule, have a higher level of average quality than the other Orc factions, I would suggest, other than maybe Angmar, depending on what sort of composition you bring with them. But a lot of the Orc factions will often bring a unit of this level because there's more of them in the unit. They're still shielded, they're reasonably cheap, and they will do the job of being a unit that you don't care about too much, a little bit better than one of the more expensive units. And pushing up the rams is a fairly standard fare job for them. Just in behind, another unit with very similar armour in the Yokai Raiders, albeit they trade in the short sword and Isengard style shield for a very large 2-handed axe, or bardiche in some cases, sort of like a big executioner's axe almost. Obviously, you know, their numbers are pretty decent. They do fill the role of a lot of the other cheaper Orc axemen as well, like the Orc Maulers or Orc Fellers from Isengard from Mordor and Angmar respectively. The Reavers are a little bit more expensive than those 2 units though, at least I believe that's still the case, and as a result the Reavers are a little bit better individually, but they still carry the same weaknesses, which means it might be a little bit more tricky to get cost effectiveness with this unit, but that's sort of splitting hairs really. They will still do the same sort of job. And among the Isengard armour piercing, sort of the cheaper armour piercing units, I would suggest this is the one that is most relevant to them, because I can't really see a reason for bringing the Dunlending Berserkers or the Half-Orc Baneguard the vast majority of the time, because the superior numbers in this unit as well as the cheaper cost just makes them better. Then, 3 units of the standard Uruk-hai infantry. Of course, I mentioned Isengard have got a better line infantry unit, and this is, of course, it. Heavier armour, just better all round than the Yokai Raiders, but of course they are substantially more expensive. You know, they will run you, actually, generally speaking, they'll run you a little bit more than your average Western Kingdoms of men-at-arms units. So that does give you an idea of how good they actually are, around the same sort of level of cost as something like the Serpent Guard of Harad or the Lugflag Rim from Rune. So they may not be on the same sort of level as something like the Númenórean Cohort or Alcarondas Legion, but they're not all that far behind. So they are a very cheap, well, not cheap, but they are a very effective front line for what they are. Having said that, they're going to be going up against Khazad today, who will be able to lay down a bit more of a marker than most factions will in terms of infantry quality. Uruk-hai Berserkers, now this is going to be a unit that's going to be very important today, I think, because of their armour-piercing punch. It's going to be very, very useful at trying to crack through those very hardy dwarven defences. They, of course, are quite vulnerable to skirmishers, because despite being multiple HP, they have no armour at all. And their melee defense also leaves a little bit to be desired. Most Berserker class units, you know, rely entirely on their HP to keep themselves alive, but while those HP are still in effect, they're going to be doing a lot of damage with those barbed swords. As of course are the Nazkai, but they suffer fewer of the weaknesses of the Berserkers. There are fewer of them in the unit, but they have significantly stronger armour, so when their hit points are gone, they still have a little bit of protection from damage sources, but still you could say that they are still vulnerable in the same sort of ways, especially to missiles. But if that's your worry, then you can always bring the Guards of Orthanc, the other high tier Isengard unit, a very heavy unit of spears. They are of course Dunlanders under that armour instead of Uruk-hai. Spears like this won't do an awful lot of damage that quickly, to be honest with you, but they are incredibly tough to kill. And keeping the assault going could be very important, and it's one of the reasons why you might want to send up the Guards of Orthanc in the first wave, to be honest. And then there's also some Uruk-hai pikemen at the back. A little bit surprised not to see maybe a couple more units of them, but in a siege like this they can be focused down. In spite of their slightly better armour, of course, pikes are always going to be somewhat vulnerable to missiles, with a few exceptions who are shielded. But yeah, obviously Isengard, very common sight in the Isengard army is the Uruk-hai pikes, and in the late game they could very well still make the difference. Then, coming in from the north, we have Beast Mode on 70. There's a unit of Warg Riders here. I would assume just to make sure that Rohan aren't too eager to sally out with some cavalry, which is not all that uncommon when Rohan are on the defence, especially when they're on their home turf of EDORAS. And the Warg Riders, of course, with their anti-cavalry bonus, are pretty good at hunting them down. Isengard in general, of course, have got a lot of good anti-cavalry options, as you would imagine, considering the purpose they were bred for. We'll go through this army a little bit quicker because it's probably going to have quite a lot of the same troops, so more Yokai Raiders pushing up the Rams. Interestingly enough, he has gone for another one of Isengard's line of units, the Dunlanding Veterans. In comparison to the Yokai Raiders, there are slightly less of them in the unit, and they also have an axe instead of a sword, which means they will do a little bit more damage but have a little bit lower melee defense. It's again another one of those situations where it's kind of interesting to debate which one is better. I would say, unlike with the heavy axemen, there are a few situations in which the veterans, I would say, are probably the better choice, and going up against the Rohan infantry may very well be one of them, but they'll do very poorly against the dwarven infantry, conversely. They also have a slight anti-cavalry bonus as well, as the Dunlanders do. Dunland clansmen over there, more Uruk-hai crossbows behind some stakes, some raiders back here, as well as some infantry. Half-orc spear guards, this is pretty much the only unit of standard spearmen that Isengard have in their roster, so it is quite an important one if you want a little bit of mobile sort of pressure for zoning out cavalry, and also of course the shield wall formation, which could be somewhat useful because Isengard really are the least likely of all the orc factions to try a mass push, but if they do, this will be the unit that they try it with. The spear guard, they also have the Bane guard, so this is one of the units I was talking about. Less men than the Reavers means I don't think they're quite as good, but individually they are tougher, slightly tougher anyway, emphasis on slightly. Then there's some pikes and some Nazkai here at the back, more pikemen and more berserkers. So yeah, a decent amount of AP, quite a lot of line infantry, a lot of shielded units, as well as a unit of cavalry to sort of zoom around the outside. Then we have Vivorax, who's actually brought the Fire of Orthanc, so this is the black powder cart, and of course they will be able to move forward and try and punch a hole in the gate. A very wide area of effect actually to knock over units, so it'll be interesting to see what sort of effect that has. It is a bit of a gimmick unit, to be honest with you, in terms of like being mechanically effective. I probably wouldn't recommend it, but it is cool. So you know, if you want to bring it, it's not going to cripple your chances by any means. Just don't expect it to be like this all-conquering force that will blow a hole in the enemy army unless they're all clustered around the wall. So yeah. Then Uruk-hai infantry, they're all pushing up the rams, actually looking like a slightly higher quality army on average this from Vivorax. He's got a few more units of pikes than his allies. He also has the trolls, the White Hand, the only Isengard player today to bring the trolls. Individually, tough to bring down, to be fair, with their armour under most circumstances, but against shock infantry generally, so heavy swordsmen, heavy axemen, they're the kinds of units which trolls are going to struggle a little bit against because of the damage they dish out, and you will find your trolls start to fall away pretty quickly in those terms. But if you support the trolls properly, they can do a lot of damage before they fall, which is the main idea behind them. Then some infantry, some guards of Orthanc, more crossbowmen, unsurprisingly, some Snaga skirmishers, and some more Nazkai at the back. So, now let's have a look within the settlement at Jev, who's going to be playing as the Dwarves of Khazad. He's got some 2nd Legion Axe Guard without the armour upgrade, but I don't think you really need the armour upgrade in this sort of situation. Obviously it's nice to have it if you can, but considering the amount of armour piercing that Isengard can bring, it might not actually be as big a benefit as it would be against certain other factions. And obviously Isengard in return, well, I say the 2nd Legion in return are going to be able to deal a lot of AP damage to Isengard. So a lot of good heavily armoured troops that Isengard have, of course. Orc Hunts of Khazad, they're going to be far superior in a skirmish fight to the Uruk-hai archers, but they're also more expensive, so there is the question of whether or not they'll actually be worthwhile if that's the only purpose they're used for. But I would also say that Allfathers are the only ones who have brought those archers. The crossbows will have to get into position to actually return fire on them as well, which isn't really recommended, as the Orc Hunters are very decent in the archer stakes, to be honest with you. They share quite a lot in common with a lot of the basic Elven archers in terms of their effectiveness, I've noted several times in the past. 4th Legion Shield Guard, of course, their basic spears are not quite the monsters they once were, but they are still a very effective unit for holding the line with that mass in shield wall and their melee defense as well. Warriors of Khazad, a basic unit of line infantry, but they're still going to be, I say that, they're probably actually around the same sort of level, if not slightly worse actually than the Uruk-hai infantry. It's really the 3rd Legion you want if you want to outright defeat the Uruk-hai infantry. I think the Warriors of Khazad around the same sort of level, perhaps more of an efficient unit than the Uruk-hai infantry, but that was debatable, to be honest. Up here, Westmark infantry, another unit which is quite interesting. They share a lot in common, I think, mechanically with the Serpent Guard from Harad. You can't upgrade the armour of them, which is a bit of a shame, but having said that, they're still quite effective in melee at dishing out the damage. We'll see how well they can do here for Drushotis, who's going to be playing as Rohan. Catapult, which is already firing actually, some Riddermark archers for Rohan, some very basic archers. They probably would actually lose a skirmish fight to the Uruk-hai archers, or it would be very close, but they're also the weakest archers that Rohan can field. We've got some Riddermark spearmen, a very, well, sort of a middling spear as far as Rohan goes. We have the Helmingus, which is the stronger archer, of course, and they will be able to out-skirmish anything at long range that Isengard has to offer, with the possible exception of the Lurtz hunting pack, but they aren't on the field today. And then, of course, the crossbows have to get into range first, which archers are always going to have a bit of a head start on them. Riddermark spears. I think that's just about it for over here. Further back, we have some more Helmingas, some more Riddermark spearmen. So a lot of spears in general, actually. Riddermark spears, and then closer towards the top of the hill, we've got the slightly stronger Westmark spears. Interesting to see how they get on the upgraded 3rd Legion infantry. We have some more Helmingas, a lot of Helmingas actually from Drushotis. So he's got a lot of range pressure, but not an awful lot of higher end infantry. Some Sentries of Khazad, so some by Dwarven standards, basic pikes, some Orc Hunters, some more Riddermark archers, and then towards the back we have what I would imagine to be some of the better stuff. So the Mighty Iron Watch of Miramir, the Shield Maidens, upgraded 3rd Legion, more Shield Maidens there, some Sons of the Fallen, some Medicel Guard are in there, some Helm's Hammers, the Westmark Marshals, the Khazad Reclaimers in numbers, more Sentries and more Sons of the Fallen. So yeah, a lot of decent stuff here right at the back. We shall see how this battle unfolds without further ado. Let's begin. Now then, first things first, of course, Jev is going to be starting to open up on, I would say he's actually targeting the right army here, because just as a cursory glance, I think Vivorax has got the most elite Isengard force, so if you're going to try and bombard one of the armies, it makes sense for it to be this one, because if you do connect with something, it's more likely to be a unit that's worthwhile. As the fiery shot streaks through the air, and they do actually, as a rather fortunate hit, manage to hit one of the trolls. It's the only unit that goes down, but every troll that dies does carve a decent amount of the strength out of the unit, so Don't know if that was the unit he was going for, whether or not he was going for the Nars Kai, but regardless, a pretty decent opening salvo. I think he was actually going for the Nars Kai based on the trajectory of those shots. Now they come to think of it, again, good hit there into the Snarger. He can't have been going for them because they're hidden, of course, and a grazing hit on the Yokai Infantry as well. So, for the time being at least, the Dwarven defender will probably be quite pleased with his rather fortuitous catapult shots. EDORAS, of course. A lot of the time we've seen EDORAS be a siege map which does take a deceptively long time because the defenders can sort of dig in. If the defenders do choose to try and take a more aggressive approach to this defence, that may explain why it's a lower frame count. Another shot from the Dwarven Catapult, grazing the back edge of this unit of Yokai Infantry. So the Catapult is very expensive, so if they keep up like this, they may eventually have it to pay for itself. But I think it's also trying to force the enemy forward and do a lot of damage right from the start, which might be the key here. Oh, excuse me. My allergies have been pretty bad the last few days. Bit of Mark Spears. The Dwarves are coming forward, but the Dwarves are also very close there to the Fire of Orthanc, which I would be a little bit concerned about. I mean, I think the blast radius will be certainly enough to kill off a fair amount of those 2nd Legion Axguard there. One. Oh, I thought that was a ballista shot coming in then. It had the sound of one, but it's not. So, of course, the first wave of Beast Mode's army going to be bashing their way through many of these outer palisades. That's also another mark against EDORAS as a defensive fortress, of course. The fact that you can use rams to get through what is effectively the outer wall. Whereas in, well, there goes the Fire of Orthanc. A rather large explosion. Let's go and see what actually happened there as soon as we get through all of the crumbling outer walls. That is a lot of dead dwarves there, so that's a good amount of warriors of Khazad that have fallen. Also, this entire unit, I think, of 4th Legion has died. So, I mean, that's really good value from the Fire of Orthanc there, and you can see that the some of the Berserkers actually that pushed the Fire of Orthanc somehow managed to survive being at ground zero of that enormous blast. But yeah, a good amount of warriors, an entire unit of 4th Legion. That's a really good start for the attackers as well. So the slight chip damage that the dwarves have done has been paid back and then some by the Fire of Orthanc. So getting a little bit lax there. Like when that is something that the oh my, that also did some more damage as well. That is 2nd volley. I mean, to be fair, at that distance you're not going to get the actual kills. You're just going to knock the unit over. So that is less of a concern, obviously. But that is something you have to be wary of with the Fire of Orthanc. If it's being utilised by Isengard, they can push it forward and essentially they can force you to abandon the very front of your settlement. Fire of Orthanc, are they going to fire it up for another go? Maybe they will. I mean, they've got 2 of them. But they're also trying to sally out a bit here, the dwarves, with Jev. They're coming out with their warriors of Khazad, and actually there's a unit of Yokai crossbows that were pushing up that ram, so I can definitely see why. To try and kill off those crossbows is a worthy endeavour, but I really can't help but feel as though that one unit of already very depleted warriors from the encounter with the Black Powder is going to very easily be swallowed whole by the Yokai Infantry. But every cloud has a silver lining for the defenders, and they will be able to get some good shots on the Yokai Infantry as they approach with the Helmingas, which are just within the settlement. But already I think the defenders are probably a little bit rattled from that. Oh man. Being allergic to pollen must be one of the most annoying allergies ever, because there's really no getting away from it. There goes another shot from the Fire of Orthanc. I have to say, I'm not entirely certain why you can fire it multiple times. I think that's more of an oversight than anything else. But once again, Jev, the fact that you can is still something you need to take into account, and Jev once again has left his dwarves far too close to the outer wall here, and Vivarax will be very, very pleased with the fact that his Black Powder has done such extensive damage to the outer dwarven defence so far, and I think the defenders are already going to have to completely re-evaluate their position here. They still have, after all, they've only lost melee units, and the dwarves don't really lack for strength on the front line. They've still got like Sons of the Fallen, Rohan have still got all their elites at the back, so the defenders are by no means out of this. The attackers have just had some good fortune early on. but they're going to need to lean very heavily, even more than they were already going to, on their ranged core. Rohan with a lot of archers, which will come into good effect against the very lightly armoured Dunlanders. But they need to get a good angle here. The Riddermark Spearmen holding back the initial tide here. You can also see in the background there the banner of the White Hand being carried deeper into EDORAS over here by some Yokai Raiders. And what road will they take to try and get to the top of the hill? There are many streets that lead through EDORAS after all. There's still this catapult that can be used, and that was awfully close to his own men there. The last thing the Dwarven player needs is to help Isengard grill more of his own troops. That was a good hit there into the centre mass of the Yokai Raiders, and the Dwarves here, a combination of 2nd Legion and Warriors of Khazad should be more than sufficient to hold back this column of Uruk-hai that's trying to climb the hill. The solidity of that line infantry, and then the armour-piercing punch of those large Dwarven axes. More of the outer palisades start to fall, however. Allfather's army is also starting to shimmy across. I would actually recommend, if I were Allfather, maybe trying to go directly for the town centre at this point, because I do think the momentum is certainly with the attackers. You can see over here the Snaga skirmishers getting up onto the hill. Vivorax has definitely been a creature of opportunity so far, and he's doing well. Now sending over here some Westmark infantry. I mean, they have to close down these Snaga to prevent them from just nailing the back of that spear line they've set up against the Dunlanders, but the Westmark infantry are decent as far as line infantry of their price goes for their attack scores, but they're still not exactly the sort of opponent that you want to send against Trolls of the White Hand. Rohan have definitely got the options for dealing with the Trolls, but they come in the shape of their heavy axemen, not their shielded infantry. And they're definitely going to need some of those. I mean, you can see over here that the initial infantry assaults from Beast Mode on 70 over here are fairly tame in comparison to the tide, which is descending upon EDORAS from the other side, but that's to be expected. He's having to come from this side on his own, so he's going to have to just sort of ration his troops, keep the pressure on, but not throw his men's lives away. But Vivorax coming over with support, more Uruk-hai infantry as well, so they're really going to be able to wrap up the line here. Isengard definitely doing quite well early on here, and I think the defenders are going to need to try and rethink the catapult, getting ready to try and shoot him. But I mean, you can definitely see over here the momentum is actually with the well, I say that they're pushing down the hill, are the defenders, but it's a rather foolhardy attempt to do so, because there are banks of Uruk-hai crossbowmen waiting from both Vivorax and from Allfather getting into positions. It's going to be a really nasty crossfire. They're trying to get some counter skirmish into them by using the flaming arrows there, but actually they're firing up into the air trying to shoot this front line. I mean, to be fair, this infantry force is going to crumble pretty quickly, to be honest with you, and it's not actually as good an angle as it first seems, but we'll have to wait and see what happens there. There's actually a direct hit there from the catapult into a couple of the Snaga. More archers over here, but what's going on here with Vivorax? I mean, this could be pretty devastating, so they're going to be able to wrap up the line here, and immediately you can see with a few volleys coming in from the Snaga skirmishers, the Trolls and the Uruk-hai infantry coming forward as well, they're going to be able to surround and butcher the Riddermark spearmen that were attempting to hold the line, and this should be enough to allow Beast Mode 70 to swarm into the settlement as well. And I think this battle has probably already got a bit of a... You can tell which way the wind is blowing in this battle, unless the defenders do something fairly drastic. You can see here that again this is just a perfect hammer and anvil strike for the Trolls to get into. Yokai Raiders continuing to grind through the spears from the front, but it's really going to be these Trolls which are going to be doing the business. The Orkanauta seems confident, and I can definitely see why. Yeah, like this now I think it's early to pull back, certainly, but I think the defenders have got no choice. Like, the outer defences have been a bit of a shambles in terms of organisation. You can see here the Warg Riders charging in, riding down some of the Helmengast that were dawdling. They're going to be able to charge down that hill, I think, and get into the back of those infantrymen as well. So this is going to be a bit of an alpha strike. There's still actually a lot of Dwarves and Rohirrim down here, because they were winning the infantry fight over here in spite of taking that damage from the crossbows. Not a huge charge, to be honest with you, but this should still be enough to start causing panic to set in, especially among the Rohirrim ranks. But no, they're continuing to fight. I mean, they definitely have the upper hand in terms of their melee abilities. They were only up against Dunlanders, but I mean, just look at the level of skirmishers they're having to deal with here. A lot of crossbowmen just lining up, ready to take their turn. And if the dwarves and Rohan did continue forward, so was a unit of Nars Kai waiting to intercept, and also some additional infantry as well. So tough for them, certainly. Snaga skirmishers heading around the back. They'll need some support before they can actually make a play on the town centre, of course. Snaga skirmishers alone will not be sufficient. Let's not forget as well, the Iron Watch of Miramir are in play, and this is the sort of map where they should actually be very, very effective. So they could definitely play their part in this battle as it trundles along. We shall have to wait and see. Half-Orc Baneguard filtering up through the streets, the half-orcs, the basic Uruk-hai, the trolls in and amongst them as well. The wargs are in the settlement, and there's now a lot of breaking happening. A lot of these units have been left behind, cut off. Yeah, and the Second Legion now breaking. Like, Khazad have got better morale than Erebor, it must be said, but it's still not. They're still not unbreakable units, at least not in this tier. Khazad have got their share of unbreakable units in their higher roster. There are the Iron Watch, sort of figuring out where exactly they want to be. I mean, I personally would place them about here and get ready to shoot into the intersection, because this is going to be a real killing field potentially. Trolls are in here. The Helmingas are just a little bit too far in front of the pikes to start receiving their support, but both of those units are not going to do too well against trolls, to be honest with you. Momentum certainly with Isengard here, and they're still filtering units in from outside the settlement. They're starting to really put some pressure on now, with Vivarak sending some units around with Allfather to put some pressure directly on the town centre. Again, like, Snaga skirmishers are going to be able to make it a fair ways up here. We'll see if Rohan and Khazad actually notice that. Look at these archers, Riddermark archers, like they're putting on some pressure onto the attackers as they move up, but Riddermark archers don't really do the damage. They're a very cheap archer after all. It is going to come down to some of the really high tier options that they have between them here. Stuff like the Metacell Guard, the Iron Watch. Shield Mains of Rohan would be actually really good in this sort of situation as well, especially for dealing with Uruk-hai pikemen as they move forward. Again, a little bit unfortunate there as the actually, I think that was the Iron Watch, was it not? I mean, forward come the Orc Hunters of Khazad, out of ammunition I would assume, pulling out their two hand axes, but while being those dual wielders in melee gives them a bit of extra melee defense, they're not really going to be able to cope with trolls and Uruk-hai infantry working in tandem with one another. And of course there are these Uruk-hai crossmen and archers in a good position here from Allfather shooting in. It's not an ideal angle once again, but it's as good as you can manage. Like, when you're the attackers, you have to sort of take what you can get with regards to positioning your skirmishes a lot of the time. As long as you're in an okay position, it's reasonable to assume that you can deal with that. The Snaga, meanwhile, actually did manage to get a volley off into the Westmark Marshals as they charged forward. And it's again, like, this is the sort of unit that you would have wanted to see against the Trolls earlier on instead of the Westmark Infantry, because they would have done some really good work against the Trolls. Very good unit of heavy axemen there, heavy AP damage. And ironically, against the Snaga, you'd probably rather the infantry because they're a little bit sturdier. Won't matter too much with the AP damage coming their way, but still. The Trolls have now been dealt with. I mean, there are some good quality infantry units on the front line. There's more Westmark units, but especially something like the 3rd Legion, considering the damage the Trolls has already taken, was always going to be a bit of a tricky one to try and deal with. There are the Iron Watch. Like, Jev needs to try and get them into a good position here. Shooting centre mass into this Isengard area. You can see the Isengard are actually shaken at this point. They're struggling to keep this attack going. They need to get some elite units up the hill, I think. Something like some Berserkers, some Pikes, just to keep things ticking along nicely on the front line, would also not go amiss. I know that the Iron Watch are a pretty scary proposition, but you're not going to be able to avoid them when the battle is like this. And there you can see the Iron Watch. So, ooh, hello. Ooh. Oof, that direct catapult hit there into the Golden Hall. Some damage to the Khazad Reclaimers, so the attacking artillery now in position from Allfather. So he could well do a lot of damage there, but you can see devastation being wrought there by the Iron Watch of Miramir. Centre mass into that Isengard push. A lot of these Isengard heavy axemen piling on the pressure now. Oof, that was a bit unfortunate. I mean, That was a good hit there. One of them also clipped their own men, however, and considering the more delicate nature of Isengard's morale in this situation, it's not exactly what you want. Oof, going after the Uruk-hai infantry, unfortunately missing there though for the defenders. So still to play for in this battle, sort of waiting for this force to get in position before they can start putting some pressure on. Ooh, hello. Some good hits there into the Riddermark archers from the attacking catapult, and the defending catapult now only has one remaining. Riddermark archers routing off. Definitely a mixed bag on this front line, but considering the deficit the defenders have already run up, attacking catapult, ooh. Again, another hit into the catapult crew there. 3rd Legion, Riddermark archers firing away. 4th Legion, no, not 4th Legion, 2nd Legion Axe Guard and 3rd Legion infantry, what are they going to do? At this point, I mean, Isengard have taken a bit of a beating on the front line from the Iron Watch and also the stronger Dwarven infantry units. But at this point, a new wave of Isengard is coming forward, and a lot of the defenders at this point have pulled back even further. So some good volleys from the Iron Watch, but ultimately wasn't able to change the fate of the defenders unless they send forward some more. And now the 2nd Legion are going to be cut off as the pikes rush in to get in the way of their retreat. And we can see there the crossbows whistling in to the backs there of the 2nd Legion Axe Guard. I mean, here you can see the Iron Watch once again are firing away from somewhere. Where are they? There they are. We're definitely going to do a lot of damage, and the morale situation is obviously going to be pretty bad for some of the lower tier Isengard units, so some good damage, but they're going to need to get a few more volleys yet. Again, some friendly fire from this attacking catapult. That, however, was a really nice shot into the Westmark Marshals. I just think the attackers have... I think it's more the fact that the defenders have reacted quite poorly to certain situations that have arisen here. Uruk-hai pikemen, defeat is a distinct possibility. I mean, defeat is going to be certain when the Shield Maidens start laying into them, because if there's one thing that does a lot of damage to pikes, it's going to be axe throwers, and the Shield Maidens are among some of the better axe throwers in the game. Bit of a morale spike as well for the Rohirrim that are around here. They're throwing some javelins in as well, so trading fire back and forth, but yeah, getting the Nazkai just a little bit further back. I don't know where they're going with the Nazkai. Like, maybe they want to avoid the Shield Maiden fire, which wouldn't be too bad, but they could also pile in and try and do some damage, because as it is, with Sons to Fallen and heavy Rohan Axemen over here, they're really pushing in some units now. They may as well, to be honest with you, because if they stay here in the middle, they're going to get pummeled by that catapult. Yeah, I'm not sure this is really the ideal angle of fire. Like, a lot of the angles that the defending archers have been quite poor as well, I would say. Let's have a look and see how the mortars are getting on here. The Iron Watch, as they reload their huge arbalists. They are going after something a little bit further down the hill. Is this it over here? Yeah, going after this. I mean, this isn't really condensed enough for me to think it's worthwhile. Like, you can see the Iron Watch are fairly inaccurate when it comes to being like shooting a small target. When it's a big blob, of course, they'll hit it. But smaller, more scattered targets like that, I don't think so. Like, and that's some very important ammunition they've got there. Even fight on the front line. That Rohan heavy axeman. The heavy Dwarven infantry. I mean, it is going to take quite a lot for some of the basic Isengard units to crack through there. Guards of Orthanc as well, not the most damaging unit, so I mean, it is going to be tough. I mean, especially with axe thrower support back here from the Shield Maidens and the Khazad Reclaimers. Again, like, another really nice hit there. It hits the Iron Watch as well. Hitting the Khazad Reclaimers. Like, they've been blobbing up, and if they haven't learnt their lesson at this point, they never will. Like, they're really just standing individual, like, well, not even individual, several units into blobs, and that catapult is doing a good job there. Unfortunately for the Isengard catapult there, they got a pretty hefty amount of friendly fire into their Uruk-hai pikemen, and this is the thing. Like, the Isengard infantry is of certainly a lower level of quality than the dwarves they're facing, so that could tip the balance in terms of the morale. In come the Snaga. Yeah, the pikes over here have clearly struggled a little bit. Some of those arrows are hitting, even if they're a little bit wayward. Point blank shot there from the Dwarven catapult, and that was actually... That doesn't work all that often, but that time it most certainly did, and it causes the Snaga in that column to rout. They're going to rout into the enemy and very quickly die. There are the Helm's Hammers as well, so actually this defence over here is going pretty well. Fire arrows coming in as well, hoping to break what's left of the Isengard forces over here. And continuing continuing to hold, but I worry they have committed a lot of their strength over there, and they're winning, of course, but are they going to be able to hold on from the front? Isengard now rushing up the hill. Oof, again, that is a lot of friendly fire. I mean, it's risky to do this for the catapult. They've got a lot of good damage done to the enemy. They've also done quite a lot of damage to their own Urukai there. It's actually quite surprising, this. I would have thought by now an absolute definitive winner would have been sorted out, and I do still think Isengard in the early game managed to rack up enough of a lead, and I think the defenders panicked to a sufficient extent that Isengard should still go on to win this, to be honest with you. But we shall see. They are ahead. But the quality, I mean, I've seen quality do an awful lot for people in the past. Medicel Guard are there. Not seeing an awful lot of damage being dished out by the Iron Watch anymore. They may be on the front line yet. Like this, over here, the problem they've got is there's some good quality Isengard units on the front. Guards of Orthanc and Nazkai, not there, but here. And there's not an awful lot on the front line now. I mean, Khazad and Reclaimers are strong. But the fact they haven't even been able to use up all their ammunition and they're being used as a de facto infantry unit at this point kind of tells the story of this fight so far. Isengard are still going to take losses going through here, but it's going to be I think it's going to be too much for them to deal with. Iron Watch of Miramir swinging their arbalists as makeshift clubs at this point. Can't imagine it would make for a very effective weapon, but whatever works for them. Urukai pikemen moving in, Khazad and Reclaimers being pulled back out, and now as a result they're going to try and swarm in. Now there's a spot of the line where there's no dwarves remaining, and they're going to try and buckle the front line that is now comprised of Helmingas. I wonder if they're going to admit defeat here. That would be a little bit disappointing if they were to do that. Perhaps if I were in a grouchier mood I would even be rather put out by it if they did, but to be honest with you, I've had a decent enough day, so I'm not really too bothered about that. Khazad and Reclaimers trying to hold on, but yeah, the momentum is clearly with Isengard here, and they're not going to surrender it at this point. The banner of the White Hand will be raised above the Golden Hall this day. Yeah, Shieldbanes of Rohan are fighting, but even as resilient as they are, both in martial terms and mental terms, it's not going to be enough. Here comes the rotting meat. Yeah, Khazad and Reclaimers, you know things are going a little bit wrong when Reclaimers are wavering. Still fighting well over here though. You can see there's still a lot of Urukai trying to force their way up the hill. It was a strange Rohan composition as well. There was a lot of archers, too many basic archers. Like, basic archers are all well and good. They can be used to counter skirmish, they can be used in the early phases of a siege, but if you overcommit on archers like that, you end up with not having enough strength. And considering the losses they took early on to the Dwarven army as well, they were always on the back foot in terms of the amount of infantry they had, and also they had units that were cut off early on down at the base of the hill there by the walls and such. More primarily Dwarven infantry units, and one unit of Westmarks that ended up dying on the other side where Beast Mode was fighting with his Dunlanders. Vivorax's flanking move caused a lot of those Riddermark spearmen to fall by the wayside, so those losses really did add up. And in spite of the fact they did fight back rather sportingly in the middle section of this battle, the defenders, it was pretty much over after the first third. Oof. Unfortunately, they hit the wreck of an old catapult there. Last gasp for that catapult is our foes taking control of the fort. Those Reclaimers. They fight hard, but surrounded on all sides by angry Urukai and Dunlanders. And that's going to be it for them. They rout. Urukai flooding in. I mean, there's really not enough left from Rohan now. And even over here, they've had to siphon off more and more troops. They haven't done so quickly enough. But like I said, by this point, it was already kind of an unwinnable situation they had put themselves in. I think it is going to be a case of admitting defeat, because yeah, there's no way in 200 frames are these Helm's Hammers going to fall away. So they will be taken prisoner, and Saruman may decide what it is he wishes to do with them. So yeah, this was a case of early on, ill fortune met the defenders in the shape of the black powder cart, and they never recovered from that. You could see the panic set in so quickly. But even in spite of that, like, look at the kills they got. Like, the defenders, it does go to show that the defenders will get a lot of kills even in a battle where they never really managed to take the lead. Beast Mode on 70 obviously got less kills, but that was because he was on his own on his side. He had to take it a little bit slower. He had quite a high concentration of Dunlanders in his army. Allfather, again, like, I think Vivarax deserves a lot of the credit in this battle because it was his black powder that ultimately ended up causing the defenders to clearly panic so much. He used it to good effect. And also, even when he was within the settlement, he sent his trolls and some infantry around to take advantage of a rather weak flank that the Rohirrim player had left for him, and he helped Beast Mode get into the settlement as well, which just further enhanced the chances of victory, which also led to Beast Mode's wargs getting in and preventing those dwarven infantry units from retreating up the hill as well. So all three of those instances, the black powder, Vivarax's flank with his trolls and infantry, and then Beast Mode using his wargs to prevent any sort of escape for those dwarven and Rohirrim infantry units on the hill. Those three things, I think, made it an unwinnable fight, really, for the dwarves and Rohan, which is a shame, because they had all the tools, I think, to make this a very punishing encounter for Isengard indeed. The Iron Watch, I think, showed that quite well, but also stuff like the Shield Maidens, the Reclaimers, the Medicel Guard, all good stuff. I do think, in terms of compositions, I don't have too much of a problem with Khazad. I think I didn't see any sort of really elite infantry, which I think is maybe a bit of a mistake on the defence for Khazad. I think we've seen time and time again that you can bring both the guards of Khazad and the Mithril Guard and have a good amount of success with them. And for Rohan, there was too many archers for my liking. I personally, considering it is Isengard and they're less likely to skirmish with you anyway, I would still bring the Helmingast because they still have a good amount of utility in melee. I'd drop the Riddermark archers and maybe just bring maybe a more numerous infantry unit, even something just as basic as the Eastmark Axemen to sort of offset the fact that the dwarves are obviously going to bring a smaller, more quality army. Having some sort of lower tier, more numerous infantry units like the Eastmark Axemen could help accent that quite well. But this wasn't really a matter of composition, I don't think. This was just a matter of panicking in the face of unfortunate circumstances. Certainly with the black powder cart, I think that's what happened, because you could tell they never really recovered from that. Like, they were trying to sort of organise their defence and it never really worked after that. They did a decent job at the summit of the hill, but even there, like, by that point the damage had already been done, I think. So let's see what did the damage for Isengard. So Nazkai for Vivarax were only committed later on. The Guards of Orthanc did quite well, actually. The Trolls, the White Hand, like I said, were used very well to sort of help secure the lower settlement. Uruk-hai infantry there. Snaga skirmishers with 111. Fire of Orthanc. So 2 black powder carts, to be fair. I mean, it is a very unorthodox thing to see 2 of them, and it worked brilliantly. I would say that be careful of doing this against sort of more experienced players, because if they see 2 black powder carts, they're not going to allow you to get as many kills as that, especially not on units of the 4th Legion's quality. Like, they may very well send some lower end units in to make sure you can't just flood, but don't expect to kill off an entire unit of 4th Legion in one blast under normal circumstances. But still, that is still a good, very good return from the black powder, probably the most significant unit on the field today. As for Allfather, the player sent me the battle replay, his crossbows did very well. His catapult also continued to do quite well, so from a skirmish support perspective he did very well. A lot of his infantry went around the back, which bottlenecked it a little bit, and it was also probably the hardest fight they had, because Helm's Hammers, Heavy Axemen, Sons of the Fallen, all of that nasty stuff. But he also helped to set up that really nasty crossfire with Vivarax at the base of the hill with his crossbows, which explains a lot of those kills there. And Beast Mode on 70, obviously less kills than his allies, but like I said, there's good reasons for that. His Nazkai weren't committed at all. Berserkers did okay on the front line, and the rest of his units just sort of chipping in as and where they could. So yeah, big thank you to Allfather for sending this one in. It's interesting because, like, you don't see the black powder cart used to strategic effectiveness all that much. Like, most of the time it's used just because it's showy and it's cool. It's not often you get to see it impact the result of a battle in quite this way, which is why I actually think this one is actually worth showing, because it showcases the danger of being too close to it when it goes off, because if you lose too much infantry like that as the defender in a situation where you're facing down more armies than you have on the defence, anything that happens like that to really shave away at your overall manpower is difficult to recover from. And it also set in, well, in this case, it set in motion a chain of events which led to even more men being lost as a result of the panic and the disorganisation setting in. So yeah, I would say that it is good to show for those reasons, but also it showcases perfectly how, if you can seize the momentum and keep it in a fight, what can happen. Because Isengard always had the momentum in this fight. The defenders were always scrambling to try and sort of seize it back for themselves, but they never really succeeded. Like, there was a bit in the middle where the Iron Watch caused a wing of the Isengard army to break, but as soon as it did, Isengard sent up a lot of Yokai Raiders and armour-piercing damage to start trying to push back against the dwarves and Rohirrim that were trying to set up a front line a little bit further forwards. And yeah, I think Isengard, Vivorax in particular, I think did very well in this fight because everything seemed to click into place for his composition. But do be a little bit careful when you try this yourself. Like, don't expect it to be... This was pretty much like the ideal scenario, I think, for Vivorax. Your mileage may vary with something like this, but still, the double Fire of Orthanc, the double Black Powder Cart, really paying dividends here on EDORAS, and Saruman has conquered Rohan, and evil reigns this day. So yeah, big thank you to All Father, and big thank you to all of the players that were involved in this battle today. As for what's next, like I said, it's kind of a fluid situation at the moment. Like, I'm coming to the end of what is effectively my second semester, albeit in rather strange circumstances. So we'll kind of see how things go over the course of the next month or so, as to what's actually going to happen, because again, like, there's a lot of variables at play at the moment for what I'm going to be able to do. I think longer term, what's probably going to happen is I will probably be doing the September to February semester at uni instead of the summer, or at least as well as the summer. Instead of just taking one semester, I think the dissertation module is probably going to cross over to 2 instead, because of the whole global situation at the moment. But again, that's something which I think can be left for a channel update, which I will probably do in the coming couple of weeks or so, just to let everyone know where I stand, because I've had to sort of recalculate what I'm going to be doing in the longer term because of this. Like, ultimately for the channel, it's probably a good thing, because it means that I'm actually going to be able to spend more time on it for a longer period of time than I thought I was going to be able to. But yeah, we shall just have to wait and see, won't we? So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.